The personal values shaping the principles I hope to cultivate in my classroom rest beneath the gentle umbrella of neighborliness. Much of this is inspired by Fred Rogers, who dedicated his life to the mission of building trusting relationships with and among children. His work on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood shows how powerfully that mission was lived out through small, steady acts of care. Voigt and Monroe explained that Rogers aimed to form a specific kind of relationship with the children who watched the program, not to be their friend exactly, and certainly not to be their parent, but to be a kind, caring, trusted member of their community. His neighborly presence is a principle I intend to embody as a teacher. I think of how every episode began the same way. Mr. Rogers entering the door, waving, and singing as he changed into his sweater and sneakers. The opening lyrics, "It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor," set the emotional tone for the entire program. Afterward came his warm, steady, "Hello, neighbor."
Hi, neighbor.
With a neighborly presence of my own, I also hope to mirror Rogers in establishing community-building rituals. Just as his predictable opening created emotional rhythm and safety for children, I believe that familiar classroom rituals can help children feel that each day will be a beautiful day and that their classmates are truly their neighbors. Personal biases. Teachers Institute writes that the uncomfortable truth is that they exist in virtually all of us, and the classroom is not exempt. They go on to say that as educators, it is a professional and ethical responsibility to examine our own again and again. In that spirit of responsibility, here are two of my biases. First, I have a bias for verbal processing, which means that I unintentionally favor students process emotions through words because I personally value naming feelings as a path to understanding them. However, research shows that children use different emotion regulation strategies depending on the emotion they're experiencing, and that these strategies continue to develop throughout childhood. In other words, not all students regulate through words. Some regulate through movement, problem solving, silence, or creative expression instead. Naming this bias helps me stay aware that students process and regulate emotions in diverse ways. It also reminds me to create a classroom environment where, as Fred Rogers once stated, anything that is human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. Second, I have a sensitivity bias. Because I'm highly attuned to tone and emotional nuance, my sensitivity can sometimes color how I interpret bluntness, silliness, or impulsive comments as disrespect. However, through a developmental lens,
What do you think?
these behaviors are often simply expressions of still growing regulation skills, rather than intentional defiance. Fred Rogers once said, "There isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you've learned their story." Once you've heard their story. I think this applies beautifully to teaching. When I pause to consider a child's developmental story, their behavior becomes more understandable, and my response can be more compassionate and grounded. Ethical behaviors. One of the songs on Fred Rogers' program was titled, "What do you do with the mad that you feel?" Rogers explained that this title came straight from the mind of a child, and the lyrics teach children that they have the power to choose how they respond to their feelings. This reflects the kind of ethical behavior I intend to bring into my classroom, an ethic of acknowledging children's feelings, seeing the whole child rather than only their behavior, and especially helping them practice self-control. Voigt and Monroe write, "We must also remember that our role as teachers is not to control children, but to acknowledge their feelings and help them practice self-control." My ethical stance also includes nonviolent communication, which Marshall Rosenberg defines as language that helps people see the beauty in others without diminishing the beauty they see in themselves. For me, this means speaking to children in ways that preserve their dignity, even during correction. The potential effects of these ethical behaviors on student learning begins with an increased sense of safety. According to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a child must feel safe before meaningful learning can occur. In other words, a safe brain is a learning brain. Safety also forms the foundation for peer connection. As Svrkovic et al. Note, emotional safety is one of the essential conditions for fostering friendships among students. And fostering friendships is exactly the kind of classroom culture I hope to cultivate. Just as Fred Rogers dedicated his life to the mission of building trusting relationships with and among children, I recognize the importance of creating a classroom culture where friendships are intentionally fostered. Rogers once said, "Mutual caring friendships require kindness and patience, tolerance, optimism, joy in the other's achievements, confidence in oneself, and the ability to give without undue thought of gain." As a teacher, I not only must strive to understand the significance of the relationships I create in the classroom, but also work to build a culture where all children feel comfortable taking risks and being accepting of one another. The potential effects of this cultural framework on student learning includes a stronger sense of belonging, which in turn supports deeper academic engagement. Grover emphasizes that a sense of belonging is not extra or optional in the classroom, and cautions educators to avoid a false choice between learning and connections. As Grover explains, it's not one or the other, it's both. Learning occurs in relationships. Effective communication. The National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification states that effective communication with students must emphasize clarity, respect, and cultural responsiveness. For me, this means far more than the old adage, think before you speak. It requires educators to understand what clarity, respect, and cultural responsiveness actually look and sound like for children. Clarity in communication is essential because it eliminates ambiguity, inconsistency, language students can't understand, and disorganized information, all of which helps children know what expectations they are meant to meet. Respect in communication matters because it removes harmful tones, punitiveness, and dismissiveness, the very behaviors that undermine students' sense of safety and dignity. Cultural responsiveness is equally important because it counters bias, cultural insensitivity, and exclusion, all of which weaken a child's sense of belonging in the classroom. All of this implies that an educator must do more than simply be nice or communicate well. An educator must define expectations explicitly, model respect consistently, and approach communication through a cultural responsiveness lens, rather than treating it as a one-off lesson. Technology. The MCEE reinforces my belief that technology is an excellent additional tool for learning, but one that must be used thoughtfully. It states that educators are responsible for promoting the benefits and clarifying the limitations of various appropriate technological applications, which means we can't treat technology as automatically helpful. We must help students understand both its strengths and its boundaries. This includes teaching them the self-control and responsible decision-making needed to use technology in ways that support rather than distract them from learning. Professional standards of practice. The MCEE states that educators are responsible for accepting the responsibilities, performing duties, and providing services corresponding to the area of certification, licensure, and or training of one's position. This expectation is not just about meeting workplace requirements. It mirrors the very clarity we are called to give our students. If I'm expected to understand my role, uphold its standards, and take my responsibilities seriously, then I must also communicate that same level of clarity and purpose to the children I teach. Maintaining professional standards becomes part of my mission as an educator because it models for students what it looks like to understand expectations, meet them consistently, and recognize why they matter. In this way, professionalism is not separate from teaching. It is teaching because I am myself a student of teaching. There is perhaps a quiet humility in educators who recognize that they too remain students. Relevant laws and policies. The National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification states that educators are expected to know and uphold the procedures, policies, and laws relevant to professional practice regardless of personal views. Though this sounds dry and procedural on the surface, I hear something deeper. Children need adults who are trustworthy. In this sense, our responsibilities are not burdens, but promises, and the ethical guidelines we follow are part of how we care for students. My first professional learning goal is reflection. Grand Canyon University's College of Education lists reflection as being at the heart of teaching, and I see it as a disposition that will deeply support my future professional practice. As the professional dispositions of learners states, teaching is a journey of introspection guided by faith and seeking to better serve God and the students entrusted to them. I view teaching in the same way, as an ongoing journey, and one of my professional learning goals is to keep that perspective. I want my heart to remain open to continually improving myself and my teaching abilities so that I can better serve the little flock entrusted to me, much like the tender care described in Isaiah 40:11, where the Lord shall feed his flock like a shepherd and gather the lambs with his arms. My second professional learning goal is curiosity. Grand Canyon University's Professional Dispositions of Learners lists curiosity not at the heart of teaching, but as a tool for acquiring knowledge and a reflection of faith, wonder, and a lifelong commitment of learning about the world. I see this tool as essential to my future professional practice because it keeps me humble. Humble enough to remember that I must continuously keep learning, and humble enough to recognize how much I need the collaboration of fellow educators and mentors. As Fred Rogers reminds us, often when you think you're at the end of something, you're at the beginning of something else. And I feel that truth deeply, especially as I will eventually be finishing my schooling and stepping into the work of being a certified teacher. Curiosity helps me hold this transition with openness, knowing that the real beginning is the classroom itself.